Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we are going to be talking about the next installment of the original Savage Dragon miniseries. It's Savage Dragon number 2. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in October of 1992, we see here on the cover, of course, featured prominently the greatest creation of Erik Larsen's entire comic book career. I'm talking about none other than Super Patriot. He's awesome. Look how great this is. Just blasting through the wall, ready for the fight, trying to come in, deal with whatever's going on. Savage Dragon is already in the midst of a battle, and he's about to have to deal with Super Patriot entering the fray. This is a fantastic cover. This is a great way to introduce a new character, the greatest character, and I absolutely love what he did here. Erik Larsen, creator, writer, artist, inker. Chris Eliopoulos, letterer. Gregory Wright, colorist. Janie Wong, editor. Ollie Optics, color separations. We see here on the first page, Savage Dragon down in the sewers, wading through the disgusting muck and carrying a flashlight saying, "Police, put your hands where I can see them." Also packing heat with what appears to be a rendition of an Uzi. I do find it quite funny that apparently submachine guns are standard issue for the Chicago PD. Like, that's how bad the crime is, that they need full auto weaponry. However, perhaps it's a plus that Savage Dragon is packing that kind of heat, as he's about to face off against this giant monstrous oaf known as Arachnid. He's living here in the sewers. He's got bodies strung up with all kinds of webbing, as he's been apparently feeding on these people. And I like that he's a spider type villain that has the full set of 8 limbs. He also has this weird mummy type of mask. Also, interestingly enough, Arachnid always refers to himself in the third person, which I guess was kind of a unique idea in 1992 that hadn't been done to death at that point. And we see here that Savage Dragon is suggesting that Arachnid give himself up, even though Arachnid is just taunting Savage Dragon at this point. But he's trying to give him the option to surrender. However, being that this is an action-based comic book, it seems unlikely that this monster will do so. Arachnid, of course, decides to fight the dragon. He unleashes a web stream from the top of his wrist, I guess, pretty reminiscent of sort of the way that Venom does so, but probably legally distinct enough to keep anyone from getting in any trouble from Marvel Comics. Also, Arachnid really looks nothing like Spider-Man and or Venom. Savage Dragon wastes no time, dodges out of the way, returns fire with the Uzi, striking Arachnid in the chest. Arachnid, however, seems unfazed, implying that he is either bulletproof or at least bulletproof to the pistol caliber rounds that the Uzi is firing, as he smashes the gun out of Dragon's hand and it shatters against the wall. He then punches Dragon, knocking him against the wall. Dragon, of course, is really unfazed by this attack and decides to bring the offense back to Arachnid as he leaps forward and hits Arachnid with a flying uppercut, knocking him clean up out of the water. This battle's heating up pretty quickly. Arachnid then smashes against the wall of the sewer and breaks an electrical conduit when he crushes into it with his huge body. He lands back in the water, but unfortunately for him, does not notice that a live electrical line is about to touch down in the water with him. However, Dragon notices and leaps out of the water to safety just in the nick of time as the voltage blasts through Arachnid, knocking him out of the fight. He is apparently still alive. Then the rest of the police force come down the sewer pipe as they look and see that Dragon has the monster. Dragon tells them that they've got a lot of cleaning up to do, referring to all of the victims of Arachnid that he has killed, and states to the rest of the police force that the bodies go on for a long way. He is now apparently just showing off at this point as he's carrying Arachnid's huge body above his head, walking through the sewers with it. And The rest of the police force realized that Arachnid was able to get away with this for so long because there was no one amongst their ranks that could really challenge him or stop him from doing this. Frank, of course, decides to thank the dragon, but, Dragon reminds Frank that the only reason that he's on the force to begin with is because of him, and kind of implying a little bit of a throwback to the first issue that it was Frank who encouraged Dragon to become a police officer in the first place. We're then transported back in time to the point where Dragon was in the hospital, realizing that he couldn't remember who he was or where he was from. One of the nurses from the hospital comes in and calls him Mr. Dragon. Dragon then looks at her puzzled and asks what she just called him, and she states that she called him that because of the green skin and the large fin coming out of his head. He decides he likes this and tells Frank to refer to him as Dragon until he can remember exactly who he is from before. Frank is happy to oblige, and then tells Dragon about his cousin Fred needing a worker and having a place for him to live. If you see my first video about Savage Dragon #1, and I suggest you do watch that if you're watching this one, Fred was Frank's cousin, and he was being held up for protection money. Dragon intervened, took out the guys who were trying to intimidate him. However, they responded in turn by blowing up Fred's warehouse, killing Fred in the process. Dragon then went back to Frank's house, told him what happened, and told him that he would indeed be joining the police force. And we are then teleported to Frank coming upstairs back to bed after that conversation and being very distraught. His wife asking what's wrong, him telling her that everything is wrong, that, his cousin's been murdered. There's a giant green monster guy who's now sleeping on their couch, and he wants to do the right thing, but he doesn't know if this is the right way to go about it. She tries to comfort him and tell him that it's going to be okay, but he's really struggling with the reality of having to deal with these superpowered beings who are just running amok in the city of Chicago, and wonders if the nuclear option of bringing another superpowered being into the mix to fight against them is really the best choice. We're then teleported a little bit further into the future where we see Dragon getting in some range time at the police shooting range, firing off 6 shots from his service revolver and putting every single bullet in the exact same hole on the target. Frank is stunned and impressed by this level of shooting and is wondering how on earth Dragon ever learned to shoot this way. Dragon, however, becomes very hostile, yelling at Frank, saying that he doesn't know. He can't remember anything. He doesn't know how he learned how to shoot that way, where he came from, who he was, and is really, really just kind of overreacting to the question. But it's a result of him dealing with the memory loss and not having any knowledge of who he was before he woke up in the hospital. Frank apologizes for asking and, tells Dragon to relax and, just kind of settle down, as we see the two of them are kind of a little bit at odds with each other at this point. We're then teleported back into the present point of the timeline in 1992, where we see none other than Super Patriot hooked up to a bunch of wires, as he has been augmented after being nearly killed by the Vicious Circle members, his face being horribly disfigured and his arms and legs being crushed and nearly ripped off. They've been replaced by new cybernetic implants, and as his eyes have as well. We see that he's remembering portions of his life as he's been fighting crime and, on behalf of the American government and authorities since the 1940s. Super Patriot, his story kind of similar to that of Captain America's, you could say. But as he got older, he wasn't able to keep up with the new breeds of criminals that were showing up. And he was, like I said, nearly killed by members of the Vicious Circle. After that, his body was broken and battered, and he decided to cut a deal with Cyberdata from Cyberforce. And if you'd like to learn more about Cyberforce, please check out my video or my playlist on Cyberforce. And we see here, this is the result. But it states that he would have made a deal with the devil himself if that's what it took to get the revenge that he seeks on the people who did this to him. Kind of, I guess, making a little bit of reference to the Spawn storyline in that case. And it would have been interesting to see a character from another comic within the Image universe go through a process similar to that of Al Simmons, but that's not what's being explored in this page. Here on the next page, we see Savage Dragon opening the door to his brand new apartment as one of his new neighbors, Debbie, comes up and introduces herself. She wonders if Dragon is part of Youngblood. He states that no, he's just an average police officer, and that he really doesn't like spandex, so he probably wouldn't fit in with their group. She and he make awkward small talk, and you can tell they kind of like each other, so Debbie begins to ask if Dragon wants to spend time together. However, they are interrupted by his police pager, folks, 1992, and he states that he has to go, there's an emergency, as he runs off to face down the danger. On the next page, we are transported to the scene of the goings-on as Savage Dragon has shown up on a motorcycle wearing sunglasses, carrying a giant, ridiculous gun that doesn't make any sense because it was drawn by someone who doesn't understand how guns work, but it's okay, it's a comic book. But just full-on looking like the Terminator in this scene is fantastic. We see here Officer Wilde, who we met in the first issue of Savage Dragon, is surprised to see Dragon again, but he says it's just the price of fame as she informs him that they are holding hostages inside and that it's members of the Vicious Circle who are demanding that Dragon himself come in and surrender to them as they want to deal with him personally. She then tells him that they're all bulletproof, so he needs to ditch the gun as the ricochet would be more danger to the hostages than would be worth it. He says, no problem, tossing the gun just through the air back at the crowd of police officers. Super safe there, Dragon. And begins his entry into the shopping mall. We then see here in a news report talking about how he's, just brought in the criminal Arachnid accused of killing hundreds of civilians. And that inside of the mall, the mallgoers are all being held hostage by none other than Hellraiser, Basher, and Mako, all known affiliates of the Vicious Circle. Dragon wastes no time in telling the three members of the Vicious Circle that he's here. They can let the hostages go. They, however, think that this is very funny as they state they have a strategic advantage with all the hostages that they don't intend to give up. But they decide that since he'd asked so nicely, they would be happy to oblige as they begin just hurling hostages through the air in Dragon's general direction, which is really a good way of just illustrating the fact that these guys do not care about the safety of anyone around them and are willing to use innocent people as human shields to do their dirty work. Dragon is caught off guard by this and is trying to figure out what his next move is going to be. On the next page, we see an advertisement for two 1-900 numbers that we've seen in many previous issues for comic news and what's in store. Man, I am not upset that 1-900 numbers basically don't exist anymore. These things were such a scam, dude. It's terrible the way that they were just ripping people off with these. Next, we see this really awesome, super cool pull-out mini poster by Eric Larson. We see Dragon jumping over the top of a police car across a wall filled with graffiti. The graffiti paying a lot of homage to most of the other, well, probably all of the other Image creators at that time. We can see Jim Valentino's name, McFarlane, Liefeld, also some things like Spawn Rules, Brigade. It's really fun to kind of look into the background and see all the little nods that he was giving to the rest of the company with this poster. And overall, it'd have been pretty cool to have this hanging on your wall back in '92. On the next page, we see an advertisement for the Savage Dragon versus the Savage Megaton Man. For anyone who doesn't know, Savage Dragon made his first appearance in a comic called Megaton. I believe Megaton Man was involved in that as well. I can't remember. I'd have to read something that goes over the history of it. Trying to find issues of Megaton are basically impossible because, as Eric Larson states in some of his letter section, there were only like 500 copies of each issue of Megaton ever printed. So the chances that you happen to be one of the 500 people who bought one of those copies are pretty slim. But if you are and you somehow managed to read it, feel free to let me know what it was about because I know I'll probably never see it. Here on the next page, we see back in the action, Dragon doing his best to try and save whoever he can as he's trying to catch some of the people being flung at him. However, he's only got two hands and there are many people flying over his head, some of them impacting the floor and wall, many of them being hurt or killed in the process. Dragon lunges forward at the Vicious Circle members as we see bystanders and civilians still being hurled through the air. And just as he's about to get his hands on Hellraiser, Hellraiser holds up a child by the hair in front of Dragon's face and basically dares him to press his attack, as he will most certainly injure this child in doing so. However, Hellraiser was not prepared for Savage Dragon's agility, as we see a sequence in which Dragon leaps over the top of Hellraiser, grabbing his head, landing on top of Basher and Mako, kicking them both in the face, and then pulling Hellraiser over the top of him and smashing him into the floor of the mall. However, the beings that he's going after are also powerful themselves, as Mako seems rather unfazed by the kick, jumps back to his feet and punches Dragon in the back. Then Basher wastes no time in teaming up and starts punching Dragon into the floor. However, Dragon seems unfazed by this as he whips around, knocking Basher in the chest back into Mako. Unfortunately, he is literally cut off as Hellraiser jumps forward and puts a huge gash up the middle of Dragon's chest and a slight cut on his face, blood gushing out. It's interesting because Dragon was able to weather bullet fire in the first issue. However, we now see his skin being broken by a blade. This is explained in the letter section of this book later on, that apparently Dragon's skin is bulletproof, but can be cut by blades that are sharp enough and made of a strong enough material, which apparently Hellraisers are. Dragon is knocked through the air by Hellraiser's attack and then smashes into the wall. However, he states that despite that being a good attack, it wasn't good enough, and doesn't seem to notice that he is bleeding profusely from his chest. However, before the battle can continue, there's an explosion as Super Patriot smashes through the wall, ready to take the fight to the Vicious Circle. We see here that he's back and announcing that he's back, and realizes that these are the people who have put him in the state he's in now, as his hands quickly begin to transform into laser guns. And then he opens fire with no regard to the safety of the people that he's trying to take care of. He, as we see, hits, I believe, that's Hellraiser in the shoulder. Basher just gets shot straight through the head. I'm pretty certain he's dead at this point. We see here that Mako's in the back trying to take cover. Dragon jumps in, grabs both of Super Patriot's arms and tells him to stop, that he's just killing them in cold blood and that he can't do that. And Super Patriot seems a little surprised that this has happened. Super Patriot states that the Vicious Circle quote-unquote killed him first, so he has every right to attack them in this manner. Dragon says that any way you slice it, it's still murder. However, unfortunately for Dragon, Super Patriot doesn't realize that Dragon is part of the police force, as his police uniform has been shredded and destroyed by the battle up until this point. So he believes that Dragon is also a member of the Vicious Circle, which admittedly makes sense, as most of the members of the Vicious Circle have superpowers or look crazy and have all kinds of incredible strength. So he then takes the attack to Dragon himself, as we see him electrocute Dragon with some sort of weird little electric gun that comes out of his arm. That's basically the mainstay of Super Patriot's powers. His limbs can transform into essentially any type of weapon that he can think of using nanotechnology. He then presses the attack, jumping on Dragon, hitting him back and forth with his, bionic arms, one to the face, two to the face. Dragon seems down and out as Super Patriot decides that it's time to kill Dragon as well, as he transforms his right arm into a gun once again, ready to make the kill shot. It looks like Dragon is in some serious trouble. However, Super Patriot is then interrupted by none other than Officer Wilde as she yells at him to freeze. Patriot says that not until justice has been served will he stop, but then Officer Wilde tells him not to shoot, that Dragon is in fact a police officer. This, however, catches Patriot off guard as he begins to malfunction and repeat the same phrases over and over again. Officer Wilde tells him to let go of the Dragon, and Dragon apparently regains enough consciousness at this point to use the opening to knock Super Patriot out as he smashes his head between both fists, and then begins to get up once again as Patriot has gone down for the count himself. However, it's at this point that Dragon realizes how severe his injuries are, as he is bleeding profusely from the wound that he suffered at the hands of Hellraiser, and begins to lose consciousness and collapses on the floor. Officer Wilde runs to his side and realizes that this is terrible, thinking the worst as we see Dragon in a huge pool of blood all over the place, with many hurt or dead civilians. Super Patriot's out. We see here that Basher most likely dead, as there's a giant pool of blood forming from around his head, and Hellraiser and Mako are both down. And this is the final page of the story in this issue, and it's a doozy, man. Things are looking pretty grim. On the next page, we are now in the letter section of the book, which still does not have an official name at this point. And right at the beginning, we see that Erik Larsen apologizes and also states that he told you so, referring to the fact that this book was going to be late. As I stated at the beginning of this video, this issue came out in October of 1992. However, issue number 1 came out in July of 1992, which, once again, keeping with the theme of image creators not being able to make deadlines to save their lives at this point. But, at least Erik Larsen was upfront about it and stated right at the beginning that it wasn't going to happen. He had some decent excuses, I guess, seeing as how at this time he had just gotten married and gone on his honeymoon, and that, he states that he had trouble meeting deadlines anyway, let alone when he was, on vacation for 3 weeks. Most of these letters are essentially the same basic fanfare. Like I said, it is cool, the parts where Erik explains some of the things about Savage Dragon's abilities. Once again, like I said, the fact that he's bulletproof but can be cut by blades. Also, I wonder if he's entirely bulletproof or only bulletproof up to a certain caliber. That would probably make a little bit more sense. There's people who asking about, what Dragon's size is. Apparently, Dragon's not that big of a guy. Honestly, he's 5'10", is all 6'4" if you count the height of the fin. But, with how huge he is, muscularity-wise, and in terms of his overall build, you'd think he'd be portrayed as being slightly bigger than that. But no, apparently 5'10" is his actual height. Here on the next 2 pages, we see more fan art that's been submitted by different readers of Dragon just kind of being Dragon, using guns, jumping through the air. I like this one in the pseudo Heisman Trophy pose. That's pretty funny. But more importantly, we get an announcement of a new contest that Erik is holding to have you create a new villain for Savage Dragon to fight against. This is actually a really cool contest, as it's allowing readers to basically submit whatever they want, essentially. There's not really a lot of rules around this, other than, it can't be a copy of something else from another book, but to just submit their own character. The winner will get the character featured in an issue fighting head-to-head against Savage Dragon, and then we'll also get a signed original piece of art, the cover from that exact issue, sent to them. This is actually a really cool contest. I like this idea, and I kind of wish more independent creators would do this kind of stuff nowadays as a way to really kind of incentivize the interaction of, the readers themselves getting involved in contributing to the work. Here on the last page of the book, we get an advertisement for Cyberforce. As I stated before, if you'd like to know more about Cyberforce, check out my Cyberforce playlist. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Jim Lee's Wildcats. If you'd like to know more about Wildcats, check out my Wildcats playlist. And that was issue number 2 of the Savage Dragon miniseries. I think that this is a fantastic book. It's such a good follow-up to the first issue in terms of progressing the narrative, introducing some new characters, but also, and this is the thing I think I like about it the most, is that it has a very Empire Strikes Back type of vibe where the heroes essentially lose. Dragon is, on the cusp of death at the end of the book. It's just been a terrible day for him, as there have been, dozens of civilians hurt and killed. We see that, he's struggling with the morality of being a police officer and trying to protect people, but also not wanting to overstep the boundaries of the law and having to deal with other quote-unquote superheroes who would otherwise be helping him if they weren't overstepping those boundaries themselves. And most importantly, we got our first appearance of Super Patriot. Like I said, I love that character so much. And I know I'm kind of joking around a lot about, oh, this is Eric Larson's greatest creation or whatever. I mean, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek, but I cannot overstate how much I really like that character and the uniqueness of him. And when he's drawn and written in a way that highlights his abilities, it's so cool to see what different artists and writers do with the character and writing really interesting stories around him. We'll get around to it because I've got a lot of the different Super Patriot miniseries. Super Patriot also one of the main characters involved in the spin-off comic from Savage Dragon, Freak Force, which I have every issue of. We'll get into Freak Force at some point or another. And he also makes a lot of reoccurring appearances within the pages of Savage Dragon, so we'll continue to see him going forward. Of course, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may vary. You might think that Patriot is a terrible character, but that means you're wrong, because he's not. At any rate, if you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.